Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. As you guys know, the big January 6th committee hearings have commenced. We will break down for you what happened last week and what is expected for today, as well as Saagar and I both have our takes on our sort of macro view of the whole thing. Saagar causing a lot of trouble online.
That's right. I'm sorry, Krystal. I always get you in trouble.
And me getting the blowback from it. Anyway, we'll get into all of that. Also, potentially a deal on guns.
Yes.
Chris Murphy, who has been leading the bipartisan negotiations with 10 Republicans, so that's how many you need in the Senate to actually get something passed. They have come up with a framework. We will tell you what is in that and what the likelihood of that actually becoming law is. We also have some grave new numbers on inflation with the Federal Reserve Board meeting this week. Very, very dire economic indicators there that we will get into. We've also got sort of both sides of the coin in terms of 2024. Increasingly alarmed Democrats questioning whether Biden's going to be too old and whether he is really the best candidate to take on potentially Trump, and also some indications on the Republican side of the aisle that Trump is also not clearing the field, and that especially Ron DeSantis is considering taking a run at this thing as well. Color me skeptical, but we will give you those indicators as well. We've also got the very latest from the whole WAPO in disarray, both in terms of Taylor Lorenz and that column she wrote that was filled with lies, and then they had to put it on an editor's note, and the editor's note was still not correct. Their own media columnist taking aim at that column in the Washington Post handling of it. Also, Felicia Somnez, who was the reporter at the center of the whole Dave Weigel situation, has now officially been fired. So we will tell you about all of that as well. But we wanted to start with your pocketbook and the extraordinarily dire numbers that came out the end of last week on inflation.
Yeah, most important issue in the country. There's just no way around it. So we're filming this before the stock market opens, but right now all indications that the S&P 500 is poised to drop at least by 2.5%, possibly up to 3.2%, which the Wall Street Journal says would officially put it into bear market territory. So it doesn't, look, these are all semantics. They have technical definitions as to exactly
means 20%
how much
down
is
from
down.
a recent high.
That's right. So 20% down from a recent high, but look, even if it's down 17, it's not great. And all of it is spurred by the most recent inflation numbers, which, look, no way getting around it, complete and total disaster. Let's put this up there on the screen, which is that we now know that the year-over-year inflation is now up to 8.6% in May. That is the highest in the United States since 1981 and the new post-pandemic record. So that includes gas prices, food prices, and shelter costs, which drove the majority of the May increase, and there is no sign of a slowdown. In May alone, inflation was still up by a whopping 1%. And I think that driving into some of the other major indicators that show you how inflation is just nuking Americans' pocketbooks. Let's put this up there on the screen. The next one, please, which just shows you groceries are up 11.9% year over year. That's the biggest increase in take-home food since 1979.
Jeez.
Chicken is up 17.4%. Some very interesting stuff on the chicken supply chain. Restaurants up 9%. Fuel oil, 107%. So if you're in a rural area and you have to pay for fuel oil based on contracts, you're getting absolutely nuked this winter. Electricity is up 12%. That's the largest increase since 2006. Rent is up 5.2%. I do want to say that is the national average. From what I'm hearing, the urban averages can be up to 15 to 20%. So that is just the national average in Podunk, wherever, where, if you include where the largest renter areas are, it's actually much, much higher for the majority of the population. Now, airfare is actually up 37.8%. That, again, is purely both pandemic demand-driven and jet fuel. Jet fuel, if you think gas is expensive, jet fuel is even more expensive. And then finally, and this is also extraordinarily troubling, is that services are up by 5.7%. So the fact that the service economy is already also jacking up prices just shows you that inflation really is, even at the most modest level, 6% there. But in many, many critical areas, you're seeing double-digit inflation in the most critical areas of life, Krystal.
I just want to piggyback on what you're saying there about why the services number matters in particular, because that shows you it's not just supply chain issues. the idea for a long time was, and this is certainly part of the story because the pandemic disrupted supply chains, anything that required inputs, consumer goods, cars, all those sorts of things, those were going up because they're having trouble shipping the goods and, seamlessly around the world because we've set up such a sort of fragile supply chain. That is all still true, but now you're seeing that inflation hit every single sector, including services, which don't require those global inputs.
Yeah, absolutely. So you conclude all of that, and we have a big mess on our hands. What's the White House's response? President Biden, he was actually at the port of Los Angeles, which is the kind of genesis of some of these issues. Who do you think he's putting the blame on? Name is Putin. Let's take a listen.
Well, he's labor from forehead to the tip of his toes. He used to run the laborers' out union. Look, folks, today I'd like to speak about my top economic priority, fighting inflation. I understand Americans are anxious, and they're anxious for good reason. I was raised in a household when the price of gasoline rose precipitously. It was the discussion at the table. It made a difference when food prices went up. But we've never seen anything like Putin's tax on both food and gas.
Well, did you know, Krystal, that Putin personally is taxing food and gas? It's funny. I've been seeing comments like, man, Putin is raising rent prices in like Ames, Iowa. Who knew the reach of the Russians?
All powerful, all knowing.
Just be honest with people. Just be honest, which is we have a supply chain crisis. Look, obviously, we had crazy demand inflation as a result of both stimulus, but also just cooped up people going out and then spending. We have the summer driving season, and beyond that, beyond what went wrong, what are you going to do about it? Like, really try and give a plan to the American people, but they just have, it just mystifies me that they continue to think that this is the one area, which is the area of the public, which we have some polling we'll show later in the show, that they least blame inflation on. The public knows actually what's going on.
Yeah, well, and there are all these pieces out now that are like, Biden is so frustrated that, they want to do everything they can about inflation, but there's just not that much they can do, and quoting all these economists like, what are you going to do?
No.
Okay, let's take the Putin price hike thing at face value, because it is very silly to think that's all the entirety of what's going on. But there's no doubt that that is a piece of it, especially when it comes to food prices and gas prices. Yeah. Because of, by the way, our own actions and deciding to embargo Russian oil. Okay, well, it's not like we're totally hands-off from that conflict and we have nothing to do about it and there's nothing we can do about it. In fact, we could be putting pressure on both sides to come to the table and negotiate a compromise so that that war ends and that Putin's price hike goes away.
Right.
So even that is extremely disingenuous, like, it's out of our hands, it's the war in Ukraine. We're shipping tens of billions of dollars in aid to Ukraine. We are deeply involved in this thing at every single level. We could be putting that pressure on, but we're not. So even on that front, even if you take the Putin's price hike thing at face value, like, there are things that we could do there.
Oh, yeah.
Even beyond that, and let's put this next piece up on the screen here from Jeff Stein about who Americans blame for inflation. And they're not wrong about this, by the way. The number one place area they place the blame on is actually corporations trying to increase profits. That's not 100% of what's going on either, but yeah, that's a lot. And that is an area where the White House, again, could have a direct impact. And I think it was Jeff who did the reporting about how there were some people in the White House who were saying, listen, go out and go after the corporate price gouging, call them out, use your power as the presidency with executive action to take aim at these corporations and the way that they're hiking profits above and beyond their own increase in costs. And we know that's the case because their profit margins went up extraordinarily last year. But they didn't want to they were nervous about doing, they weren't sure that was the right thing to do. So, the obvious things they could do that are in their hands, they have taken off the table entirely.
And unfortunately, Krystal, I did that whole monologue on this. A lot of the corporate price gouging, they got most of what they could already. And this is another issue with the Biden administration. By not acting a year earlier, he actually could have tamped down on the profit maximization that was happening in the stock market in 2021. But already, the reason that stocks are down and the reason that corporations can't hike prices even more is they've basically gone to their full extent. And now they're losing money. That's part of the reason why the Dow is dropped. By the way, if anybody wants a deal, go to Target. Target has a disaster right now because there's way too much inventory on its hand, and it's slashing its prices by like 40%. Might be good for you in the short term, but Target stock is dramatically down, and it's indicative of consumer prices. But the point that I'm making is that Biden, by acting, or not acting, or even not even floating action until now, makes it so that many of the things that were on the table to stem some of the tides of inflation when it was 3%, 4%, are almost impossible whenever you're talking about 12%. Here's the other issue. Is anybody really going to give Joe Biden credit for dropping from 12 to 8? I mean, 8 is still a disaster. So by not getting out ahead of it, he's screwed himself politically and actually resigned us really all to pretty much runaway inflation. And I think my scariest thing that I saw this morning, which is from Bloomberg, which is that this is a headline. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is facing an increasingly grim calculus. He probably has to push the economy into recession in order to regain control of prices. And look, this is Biden's fault. I mean, to allow things to get so bad and to have the political system essentially break down that now all we have left is the Fed. Well, the Fed it's a blunt tool. You know, it has one instrument. Has always been the knowledge. They can push us into recession. That will certainly drive demand down. And sure, it'll take care of inflation, but then we're going to have unemployment at 7%, 7.5. I mean, it's a disaster. And it's not like, you know, even by pushing the economy into recession, let's say that we do drive price demand of gasoline. Okay, I mean, right now it's $5. What are they going to push it to? $4.50? $4? That's still very high. I mean, by not dealing with the supply problems, which is the job of Congress and of the president, they're truly, I mean, we could have a stagflation type scenario. Yeah. I think we really are back in the 1970s.
Yeah, and again, just one more point on there are things that the Biden administration could do. All right, he's already, you know, war in Ukraine, pushing to end that. We didn't have to embargo Russia's oil, but we made that choice. Biden made that choice. You didn't make that choice. Biden made that choice. Okay, that's one thing. They've already flipped on their Saudi policy, so they're now bending the knee to MBS to try to convince OPEC to increase. Yeah, to increase oil because Saudi oil so much more humane and so much more humanitarian than Russian oil. All right, there's that one. You know, it wouldn't fix the whole problem, but you could do the Iranian nuclear deal and also have, you know, access to Iranian oil.
But then the Saudis won't pump oil.
You could, that's true. Then you have the Venezuelans that you also, so it's not like there's nothing that you could do that's on the table, but gas is probably one of the more difficult things ultimately for them to deal with. And if you look at the numbers, Biden's approval rating slides down and down and down as the gas price goes up and up and up. So, you know, as you hear pundits talking about all of the various things that are going on in our politics, you would be hard-pressed to find a more direct indicator of how Biden's doing than what the gas price ultimately is. With regards to the Fed meets this week. We will have an announcement later this week as to what their next move will be. Prior to this report, the expectation was that they would hike interest rates by another 0.5%. And now there are a number of analysts who are saying because of this report, their expectation is that we will have a 0.75% rate increase. So that's part of why, it's actually a big part of why the markets are kind of in free fall right now, is because they recognize that those inflation numbers will push the Fed towards more aggressive action, which, I mean, that's what the whole point of that is to tighten the supply, to make money, you know, to make it so that people have less money, are less able to purchase things, less able to take out loans, to slow the economy. And to ultimately, I mean, it is looking increasingly likely that it is going to be impossible to have a soft landing and we are headed to a recession.
There's no soft landing. They're going to have to destroy the housing market and they're going to have to do something called demand destruction, which is basically raise rates and make it so impossible for capital in order to borrow that they can't have any investment. And I honestly think that is the worst possible outcome because we're going to destroy our housing market. I'm not saying that it didn't need to cool down, but capital expenditure is going to go way down. What happens in the middle of recession? People don't invest in anything. They just start cutting costs. So we're going to be pushing businesses back to the incentive of just-in-time delivery, just at a moment where we shouldn't have just-in-time delivery. We actually need to make it cheaper for corporations in order to indulge in inventory because part of the issue that we all fell into in the pandemic was that inventory became a nasty word, having it on your books, so corporations did just in time, and then the supply chain crisis hits, and boom, we all get hit with a massive price increase. So we're actually reverting away from where we should be. We're going to be in a much more precarious economy, and ultimately consumers, I was just reading this morning, food at home cost, as in grocery store food, is somehow higher than restaurant food. Somebody needs to explain that to me. It's 11% inflation for food at home, and it's only 7% in a restaurant. I don't know what's going on. I think the government should investigate that. But beyond that, I was reading some 35-40% of customers are now engaging in different price and price sensitivity for grocery stores. They're not shopping in the way that they normally were. They're buying half gallons of milk instead of gallons of milk. People are like pouring water into. This is 1930s Great Depression level, and this is like little kids. Here's the other thing. Shrinkflation is happening. Cereal boxes are now 17% less than what they were like 2 years ago. So you're getting less cereal for the money. Now you're having less milk to give to your kids. It's a real, that stuff leaves real scars on families for a long time. Kids grow up with that, remembering how their parents had to scrimp and save. It's not good in the richest country in the world.
We talked about how since the expiration of the child tax credit, half of families, say they're struggling to feed their families and feed their kids. And a large part of that is loss of the child tax credit, which, the foolish calculation there was, Republicans will definitely join us to reauthorize this, or it'll be a great issue for us in the midterms. None of that worked out. But families are really struggling because of its expiration. And then the other part, obviously, is prices going up. Mm-hmm. And so the money that you do have is just not going as far as it used to or anywhere close to that. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.